Hi everyone, my name is Josh and I will be going over the effects of post-exercise heat versus cold exposure on strength gains. This study is comprehended around basically sauna versus cold water immersion and how these two recovery modalities can hopefully benefit mainly strength athletes, but benefit more people who want to improve in strength gains by recovering better. Before I actually get into the cold water immersion versus the sauna discussion, I want to briefly discuss what muscular strength is and why recovery is important. Muscular strength is the body's actual ability to produce as much force as possible during physical fitness, which is very important for being physically fit. And resistance training essentially helps the body to adapt neurally and basically increase muscle mass, which is known as hypertrophy. Recovery is important because it's the body's ability to restore homeostasis after subjecting the body to that much stress, especially performing as much force as possible would be very stressful on the body. So we want to be able to recover from that. And throughout the recovery process, the body will after producing force, the body will produce micro tears, and during recovery, it'll repair and remodel that muscle tissue, and these recovery effects will basically give you that hypertrophic response. And these recovery modalities are thought to be able to influence these positively for strength and hypertrophy purposes. On this slide, we have a couple things that will show what happens when you recover properly, or basically you can recover properly, and effects of not being fully recovered and still trying to continue to train. On the right, we have having good night's sleep, staying hydrated, eating whole foods, high protein. On the left, we have your performance will decrease. You'll be at increased risk of injury. You'll have slowed muscle growth. These are things that typical strength athletes or even someone who's working hard in the gym every day would want to avoid on the left, and things you would want to do on the right. And this will kind of help bring an overall picture of why we want to use the hot versus cold, just as an increased help for someone who is maybe harder in the gym. Here we have a picture of a muscle fiber, and it's extremely zoomed in so you can see that there's one muscle fiber and what's called a micro tear. Here there's a micro tear in the muscle, so this muscle had just been worked out, and basically when you work out, you cause these micro tears to form, and the nuclei will come to that micro tear to fix it, and it would be fixed with the help of proteins and other sort of mechanisms throughout the body. But this specifically kind of gives you an idea of what happens when you work out. There's going to be a micro tear formed, and when you want to do post exercises, help the body recover from these micro tears that you just formed from exercise. And to give a brief background on strength training, strength gains result from what I was saying, neuroadaptation and muscle hypertrophy. Could be affected from a number of different factors, from the individual person as well, genetics, age, gender, and basically recovery. And proper recovery basically helps to maximize your strength gains. Overall, you cannot really have great strength gains unless you're recovering properly, because the recovery process is what creates the hypertrophic effect and your strength improvement. The purpose of this study would to be to investigate long-term effects of sauna and cold water immersion on 1RM squat. And this This protocol will last 8 weeks, and it'd be helpful to determine which method is more effective on recovery in a standardized training program. So all the participants would be doing the same exercise, and there'd be 3 groups: one with the cold water immersion, sauna, and a control group to basically focus on seeing what of the 3 is effective. The recovery modalities, like I was saying, heat therapy, which is primarily used for increasing blood flow, nutrient delivery, and just to help with overall relaxation for that person. Cold water, which reduces inflammation and helps with soreness. This is for like the person to basically calm down. And these are what these 2 things are mainly used for. These aren't exactly what the benefits are of them. This is what like people would generally use them for, and like what they would typically do. And what we want to figure out is long-term effects on strength gains. There hasn't been many long-term studies on these subjects. They've mainly been acute and over like short-term of possibly like 1 day to like 2 weeks. So this would be an 8-week protocol to see how over a long time it would work. So our main problem was, other than what I said, it was mainly acute, so it's mainly over a short time. There's less evidence on sauna or cold water immersion on maximal strength gains. There's been a couple studies on hypertrophic effects, and there's some other studies on possible psychological outcomes, but not many on strength gains and that sort of effect. And then our research question is, does post-exercise sauna or CWI affect 1RM squat gains over 8 weeks? And then we'll have sauna for 10 minutes at 90 degrees Celsius and CWI at 10 minutes at 10 degrees Celsius. I wanted to have both of them for the same amount of time to see what effect is 1-to-1, and then there'd be a control group at the same amount of time sitting in a neutral room. And then our hypothesis is that the participants going under the heat exposure will show greater improvements than those of CWI, and I will explain that later. The significance of this study: strength correlates to reduce injury risk, better mobility, and better health outcomes. And understanding these long-term effects could help athletes such as strength athletes, Olympic lifters, football, rugby, soccer players, any performance-based sport which strength is a big factor, can be determined to have better for heat or cold. These could help their athletes and the coaches kind of decide, what's the better recovery protocol for my athlete and how this can help them improve in their sport. And of course, all this evidence will be, or all this information will be evidence based on what we find through. Some definitions that would be important for this protocol would be the 10 minutes post sauna protocol, the cold water immersion, 10 minutes post exercise, 10 minutes after exercise. Strength gains would be defined as the change in 1RM squat. So from pre to post, how will that 1 rep max squat change across 8 weeks? The definition of trained lifters, because we're gonna offer trained lifters if we're gonna help improve resistance training individuals, people who train often, be greater than or equal to 1 year of training. The controlled variable, which would be the match training protocols. And here we have heat shock proteins and mTOR. These are 2 proteins that are affected by exercise and by temperature specifically. Heat shock proteins are produced in response to cellular stress. This would be heat included, of course, in the name. And mTOR is a protein that helps cell growth, proliferation, and metabolism in the body. This is also affected greatly by the temperature of the body, so it would just be an important protein to know when going through this. And muscle protein synthesis is a process where new proteins are basically created within the body, and this is a big effect on recovery and improvements in strength gain. Here I want to bring up some of the cold water immersion information that was seen throughout the literature. So it was used mainly for reducing soreness and fatigue. It was seen that in Roberts et al., it was seen that it may actually attenuate strength and hypertrophy gains. And a lot of the resources did say using this protocol post exercise, using CWI post exercise, was known to actually decrease hypertrophy. And it was mainly like the main recommendation was not to use it post exercise. But again, this stuff was seen acutely. So we want to try this over a long period of time to see if there's actually a different effect when used chronically. Again, and another thing that was seen was reduced muscle protein synthesis and inflammation response. When you are putting ice on something or cooling something down, you are therefore reducing inflammation. So that's something that would also be interesting to see, like if there was a different effect in and the protocol duration. So basically how long they sat in the ice bath. A lot of studies, cold water and sauna together, had issues with actually being able to sit in the cold water, sit in the sauna for an extended amount of time. So we're hoping like 10 minutes is a medium amount of time that participants are able to withstand. Heat exposure. So heat exposure actually had the sort of opposite. Sauna use was for increased blood flow, plasma volume, and HSP expression, those heat shock proteins. And that would be good for basically getting the nutrients to all the muscles. Specifically, it was seen to have a cardiovascular effect. So the effect of exercise, like again, blood flow, plasma volume, stuff like that, was seen to be also an effect that happened when participants sat in a sauna. So that was an interesting effect. So the same effects that happen in exercise could happen in sauna. We're not sure. And again, the temperature and timing of the sauna. So there was some studies that had sauna before, and they actually used it as more of a warm up, and they saw benefits from that. But there wasn't there was less information for like how it worked afterward and the outcomes of that. And then there was another study there was many studies actually who used the infrared saunas, which were seen to have somewhat of a beneficial effect, but these infrared saunas also had less heat and they didn't get as deep into the body as the traditional saunas did. So it may offer less of a benefit, or it may not be what's needed, that's extreme heat that's needed. That's why we went with 90 degrees for the temperature as opposed to a lower temperature, even though it's more tolerable for the participants. And we also did the extreme 10 degrees Celsius for the cold water, even though it's less tolerable, just to see like those two extremes, how much they differ. And then here's kind of just like a visual. The blue would be like the cold side and like kind of the intramuscular effects that's happening. There's less heat shock protein expression, there's less mTOR and protein synthesis signaling, less muscle protein synthesis and blood flow, vascular shear stress in the cold, and the opposite. So although these things do seem like they would be a negative effect, again, these are acute results, so we're not sure if long term maybe they help. This lowered effect kind of helps in the long term, and like overall helps when you're maybe not working out. Maybe there's like a different effect. And then here I kind of wanted to show basically a visual of what I was saying in the other slide of exercise like cell signaling. These two slides kind of go hand in hand, this slide and the last slide, but it shows the effect of at 10 degrees Celsius, there's less exercise like signaling, and then as you heat up, you kind of have a more and more exercise like based effect, like with the HSPs, muscle protein synthesis, and things like that. And here we go into the methods. We want to have 45 participants, ages 18 to 30. We want to have basically younger trained adults. We're going to have 3 groups: the sauna, the cold water, the control group. They'll do an 8-week lower body strength training program with pre and post testing, and then we want to measure their 1RM pre and post, their body composition, again pre and post, weight, and then when they're actually doing the protocol. So when the group is actually doing the cold water or the hot water or the sauna, we want to take their temperature before, during, and after they enter the sauna and leave the sauna to document basically their temperature changes and what the temperature is at the time of the highest effect, or how the temperature is being affected throughout the protocol. And then here's an example of a lower body strength training program overall, just to kind of give you a picture of it's going to be mainly legs based on hypertrophy and progressive overload. And then how do we recruit participants, and what is their criteria, basically extended from the other slide. We want to have healthy resistance trained individuals. So again, we want to have trained individuals for a year and a half or more, and they want to be at least 18 to 30, just so we can kind of gauge how healthy they are. We want to exclude any diseases, metabolic diseases, cardiovascular issues, or someone who basically just isn't able to or doesn't want to handle the hot or cold temperatures, and hopefully find an even number of male to females. So about like 48 to 50%, 52% male to female. The training program, like I showed in the slide before, we want an 8-week focused resistance training focused training program, lower body. We want to have them push weights weekly. We want to either go up in reps or intensity each week, and we want to make sure that each individual is going through the same exercises, but their progressive overload is going to be tailored to them specifically. We want them to be pushing as hard as they can individually. Some limitations of the study would be obviously the individual difference. Each person is different. They have different sleep, genetics, lifestyle, their tolerance to the protocols. The modalities can be pretty difficult to say into, like I've been saying. There's going to be a small sample size, so only 45 people as opposed to a huge amount, so that could vary, that could change the sort of statistics of everything, and the focus is only going to be on the squat improvements. So this effect might have a different effect on upper body strength training and the protocols or the modalities. And some delimitations: we're going to have only trained individuals, and we're only going to test sauna and CWI. So nothing like We're gonna want them to avoid stretching, foam rolling, and stuff like that for recovering. And we're gonna have that 8 week duration. Some gaps in the research. There's limited long-term research in the sauna and CWI, which is why this study would be very important for filling in those gaps. Optimal temperature, timing, and duration hasn't been very well established, so this study could kind of figure out maybe the best timing for the best timing and duration would be post exercise, immediately post exercise for 10 minutes, like we are doing, and most exercise focus acutely and not chronically. So, some expected applications. These will be able to inform athletes of how to recover and improve their recovery methods. It'll identify whether sauna or cold water better supports long-term strength and help in sports rehabilitation, performance training. This could possibly improve physical therapy. If somebody's injured, they can learn how to recover better and basically back into their sports quicker. Help athletes give better recommendations and help the athletes know how to recover better. And that's all. Thank you.